You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. We are about to jump into... I'm actually going to say quite a creepy episode. I kind of enjoy this one, but The Passerby, episode 4 of season 3. On this one, it's post Civil War, 1865, and we find that these soldiers are all sort of traipsing their way home after the end of the war. And one stops by this woman's house to have a drink of water and ends up staying there. And they sort of watch these soldiers will keep on walking by as they relate stories of how people they knew until they start to see the people they knew sort of walking on the street. And we learn more about these people passing by. Julian, what were your thoughts on the Passerby?
I like this. I think it's good. I do think that it is at its best when it lets itself be creepy and unexplained, and people are dead, and there's a sort of national mourning and trauma that is being expressed in this sort of symbolic plot. Ultimately, it leaves me a little wanting. But I still think that it's strong. It's still a good episode. What about you?
I really enjoy it. I think this is the one thing I say. This is tempered by 1960s TV standards or 1960s TV censors, I would say, because you do get a great scene, which we'll get to, of a guy in shadow and the reveal of his wounds, which I really enjoyed. But I think there's more, there's sort of things that are indicated off screen. So I'm a bit like, I think some of that should have been a little bit more on the screen, sort of.
What's indicated off screen? So let's do some concrete examples there.
So the one thing that sort of I was curious about was that could have been still remain ambiguous is she sees later on one of the passers-by is some guy she's known from one of the soldiers is someone who's lived in her town, and she knows his wife, and she sort of celebrates him coming back, and she says, oh my god, your wife's gonna be so happy to see you, and when you're all settled in you need to come round, and we heard you'd been shot at so and so, and and then like he sort of is vague, and you just see the front of him, and she walks away and she's holding his cap, but you never see the cap, and she just says, oh, there's blood on this. But there's never like, oh, there's a bullet hole. But I was like, I would have liked him. Like, I almost want to have seen that. It's black and white. And I don't want gushings of blood. I'm not looking for that. But like, see the cap so that the sergeant who has stopped to get the water and stuff staying there can almost make an excuse to be like, it was a bloody war. Like that doesn't need to be his blood. Like it could be, it could be that could be anybody's blood sort of thing. Like trying to justify what trying to sort of pave over almost the weirdness. And there was that, and then there's others where I was, the people that are sort of lame and limping past, and there's some really good ones, but it felt like this could have done with being that little bit bloodier. There was one where the guy's got like a bandage wrapped around his face, and you can just sort of see the top of his nose and his eyes, and I was like that's such a cool idea. Like this is like these injuries, but they all seem a little bit tame in compared to what war would have been. Which is still, I'm not saying I wanted that, say the blood and the guts, but like it's still like
the Civil War prequel.
Yeah.
Body horror.
Yeah. Again, this is one if you made this today, like as a remake, like in post Game of Thrones era, like or Walking Dead era, like, you would get that. I think there'd be much more indication, but it's good. It still works for me.
Yeah, I was kind of bothered by that. I definitely felt that same way with the soldier who's been shot in the head.
Yeah.
And it works. You should definitely see that cap, right, as covered
Yes.
in blood and some brains or something, right? Just some material of unknown origin, right? And just soaked. And you think, okay, I kept thinking we were going to see the bullet hole, or there was going to be some reference to that she
That's
would.
what I was expecting, like a hole through the cap or something. Yeah.
Well, when he's obviously not in his right mind. I mean, he's sort of zombified. He's sort of out of it, and he does feel like a dead guy processing, through the underworld, especially with the trope of Hades and forgetting and all of that. So it plays off of that. I don't know what that means for the afterlife in this universe. If you can be shot in the brain and that makes you forgetful in the afterlife, I don't know. But I did wonder, like, if I get that they don't want to either A, show the bullet wound, or B, have her say there's a giant gaping hole where the back of his head should be, because then that reveals the whole plot right there. But I wonder, why did she not see that? There should be a gaping hole in the back of one side of his head.
This is where it sort of, I say there's inconsistencies in this episode that sort of bothers me, because we do get the scene later on where a guy in the horse comes up, and you may need to sort of confirm this to me, because it was in black and white, and obviously this is set in the South, which is also quite interesting. This is there's even sort of suggestions of, like, the South will rise again kind of thing. Excuse me, but, like, there's that sort of mentality of, like, the defeat, and the sort of, especially the woman, whose home it is, that sort of, like, that thing of, like, the humiliation of defeat and the new potential for a new confederacy and all that sort of stuff. It's mentioned. So when you get the guy come up on the horse, I'm unsure if I can't remember if he's a Yankee or if he's a Southern soldier. So that sort of felt like I mean, I think he's a Yankee, isn't it? Because she pulls the gun on him.
Because she shoots him with a shotgun.
Yes. Oh, that's right, exactly. Yeah, she shoots him, and then sort of nothing happens. So nothing happens in the afterlife, but when he is revealed, like because the guy says, like, "Oh, I remember you were, this is what happened, and you were scratching at your eyes," and so on and so forth. And then they reveal, and he's got this disfigurement and this wound on his face. And it's a really great reveal, because keeping him in shadow looks creepy as hell as well. Like, the cinematography on that part is really, really good. But then you've said, like, we've seen others that aren't afflicted with wounds, or the wounds are indicated, but they're not as explicit. And it's even weirder when we see Abraham Lincoln at the end, and I'm like, you were shot in the head, like, this, like, you should be a bloody pulp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is inconsistent, and it's something that I always wonder about anyway. Like, you often see depictions of the afterlife or something like that, where somebody has wounds. First of all, it's like, well, why aren't they young again? How does that even work? But if you do go to the afterlife as you were when you died, some of these people got cut in half. Some of these people got, blown up by cannonballs and things.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think usually what happens in those kinds of stories is that we're limited by our mammalian brains, and the writers go like, yeah, well, if you were cut in half, obviously, you've got to be whole, because you got to be walking around. So that's how we envision it. But if you were shot, or you have some mild wound, that's going to continue on because it's creepy and whatnot. And it's always winds up being inconsistent and working or not. But I do hear you. I actually thought that you were going to mention something else, which is that let's see, it's Lavinia is waiting for Judd.
Yes, and Judd. I was going to mention Judd. Yeah.
Charlie, Judd comes at the end and is like, yeah, I'm really dead. But is it Charlie who stays with her? Well, another inconsistency is, like, all right, why do you want water? I mean, in heaven, you get really thirsty, I guess. So I thought maybe you were going to say that Charlie would be sleeping with Lavinia.
This is what I was curious about. Was there is this sort of, what's the relationship? Is it because I was looking, because this is the incident I wanted to ask you, like, what's the time frame on this? because he stops to have that drink of water. And one of the inconsistencies I was trying to explain in my head, there's later things that sort of explain, I'm using as a touch point, which is my own headcanon. But yeah, he stops, he drinks the water, and he sort of sings a song, and he plays some music, and then he talk about this thing and her grief for her husband and all this other stuff. But the next scene, like, he's wearing, I swear it's a different shirt, like he's chopping wood, he's doing stuff for her, and I'm like, oh, and they seem very familiar, and I'm like, is this weeks? Is this months? Like, how long has he been there? Like, and even like a passing reference could be like, the passing of time feels odd. Like, I don't know how long. I couldn't even tell you how long I've been here working for you now.
Right.
The passing of time doesn't, it feels odd in this, whatever. Like, they could easily just fob it off, but keep the weird. But yeah, it's sort of like it's not. That makes it weirder then, because when Judd does come, like, at the end, I felt the same. I was like, oh, so what's this relationship? Like, how does this work? Like, what's this thing in this purgatory? And he seems fine as well. Like, Judd seems sort of like quite clean and in his uniform. And I was like, okay, this is another one that doesn't quite fit. The two things that sort of jumped to my head when this turned up was Beetlejuice. Weirdly enough, like the way they depict the afterlife is like your injuries stay with you. Sort of like, you get the guy that's been run over by a truck and he's sort of like, he's flat and goes into the thing, and those sorts of things. So I was like, okay. But the other one is that in Clive Barker, in his Books of Blood, the 6-volume short story series he did early in his career, actually has a story called The Books of Blood. It's the one that sort of kicks it all off. And in that, there's this idea of, it's this medium sort of ends up becoming the Books of Blood. Like, the dead want to write their stories and they end up writing them on him. But one of the depictions is like they are on their way to the afterlife. Like, they can't enter the afterlife until their story is told and this other stuff. And so some of them don't know they're dead and all this other stuff. So they sort of acknowledge the inconsistencies there, because people if they don't know they're dead, that they don't recognize the injuries and stuff. And so I could see that in this, where, there might be ones where they're just like, because I've heard stories of this, or at least when I did history, this idea of when the war ended, and you hear this in sort of all these other things, of like people from both sides sort of helping each other out to get home. The war's over, so South and North didn't really, obviously still was bitter, but like, they become like people again. There's no purpose to the fighting. So I like the fact that he points that out, that like, well, there seems to be sort of like Yankees are helping Southers and Southers are helping Yankees, or they're just boys trying to get home to their families. But yeah, I was hoping for something more, like a bit of a sort of like a bit of a point about this is the journey, because I like the fact they don't know where it is. They just got to get to the end of the road. I like that. I don't want to be told it's heaven or whatever. Just this need to get to the end of this road. But yeah, just something to sort of to refine this sort of the point of this would have been nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on all of that. I think that Charlie doesn't know that he's dead.
No, I don't know. And neither does Lavinia.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. And so he sort of says, I think I've worked it out, but I'm not sure at the end. So, clearly it is playing with that same sort of trope of the people not knowing that they're dead. I think that at its best, this episode works with that ambiguity, that it doesn't need to have concrete answers. It should be a little more consistent, right, in its presentation of injuries and things like that. But I agree. I'm with you. Like, I don't need to know where they're going. This is an allegory. This is not real life, right? I mean, the more that you nail it down, it takes it lessens it.
Yeah, I like the ambiguity around it. Like I say, you just want that little bit of consistency, or even, I mean, one of the things, I think about it. And again, you couldn't do this in 61, so it wouldn't have worked. But nowadays, what you'd do is you'd sort of have the realization of death would lift the veil, and they would see the truth. So they might see just these sort of like, roughed up, sort of slightly injured soldiers walking home when they don't know they're dead. But that realization of, oh, we're dead, the veil is lifted, and all of a sudden the wraiths sort of like walking past are sort of like, much worse and much more sort of insubstantial, or something that sort of says, oh no, this is the truth. Like, what I was hiding from myself was what was giving them sort of like that corporeality, that sort of substance. And I think that would have been that sort of thing again, like you talk about, sort of like our need to not acknowledge death in that way, sort of like, lying to yourself to try and make things easier, and that the truth actually can be quite painful in that realization. And that's where Charlie's like, I've got to take this walk. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know what's going to happen, but I've got to take this walk. So I think there's a remake of this. I think would be fantastic. But I really enjoy this episode.
Yeah, and I like the set. I like the falling down sort of plantation house. This thing about the South will rise again, and this theme, though, and these can be my final thoughts. Is also problematic because while this is best as that sort of like allegory, as a creepy little short story, if it has a theme, it's just this allegory for the intense national pain of the Civil War. And it works on that level. And I love Lavinia talking about, like, there weren't many tears because we thought we were going to kick those Yankees' butts and be back in a month. How many wars started that way?
Oh, yeah. We'll be home by Christmas, boys.
Yeah, exactly. Vietnam was going to be
the First World War. It was all over propaganda there, yeah.
Absolutely. And so, and obviously the Civil War was and remains a sort of national trauma. But at the same time, this idea of we need to put it behind us, of both sides helping each other home, and this lesson of Lavinia needs to put the gun down and not, okay, that was the lesson of the abandonment of Reconstruction, right? That idea of national unity has been a guiding force of American history. It has guided our worst times when we have settled with slavers, where we have settled with the South on issue after issue, and where we have settled today with forces that want to drag us back into the past. There aren't any black characters in this episode, right? No. So it's a good episode, but it's also an episode about white America healing those rifts. Blacks are an accessory to that process, and their futures are not important nor considered as part of that process.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's a really good point, actually, as well. That sort of that thing. Maybe could it be interesting if Charlie had been black? Lavinia.
Well, there were black soldiers. I mean,
especially, definitely. Yeah, maybe that advanced a different element to it. No, I like all that, and I think this feels like a very American story. This sort of goes back to that sort of that culture and that sort of that history. And so, for my final thoughts, so again, I think it's a great weird tale. I think it works well. It's been redone a few times since. I think I've seen versions of this sort of idea, but I've really enjoyed this, and I think it works. One of the weird things is that thing of Abraham Lincoln being the sort of, he declares himself sort of like the last victim of the Civil War. This is one of the things that Twilight, they like to have a nice full stop, like a big round full stop on the sort of thing, But I like the sentiment of him sort of like, helping this woman and sort of saying, like, it's time to go. Like, let's, like you said, let's move on. Let's don't stay behind. I'm the last on this road. Come with me. And then she runs after Judd and sort of says, like, she sort of accepts it to an extent and sort of decides to be with her husband. And so it plays that well. So I actually really like this episode. I think it's a really strong sort of episode. Again, the things I think that if you were to make this with different censors, I think they'd be able to show more and do more. I think they were trying to restrict, but no, it works really well. This works really well. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, as always, come and find us. Let us know. Do you agree with our thoughts on this episode? Does it work for you? Let us know. Come find us on social media. Check out our Patreon as always, and leave a review if you're enjoying what we're doing. Tell us what you think on those reviews. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you on the next episode.